looking forward to a great.
Hi everyone, my name is Mini. I'm the panelist. My pronouns are she, her, they, him. All the best.
Hello everyone, my name is Pugad. My pronouns are he, him. Good luck to everyone.
Hello everyone, my name is Gab. My pronouns are he and him. Best of luck.
Everyone, name's Chris. I'm with the palace, but he, him. Good luck, everyone.
Hi, I'm Sam. Pronouns is he and him. Good luck to everyone.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, just a few housekeeping rules. Firstly, before you start your speech, please announce your preferred gender pronouns if you wish to do so, and also your POI preference, and be mindful to respect the speaker's POI preference for their speeches. Secondly, because I'll be concentrating on taking notes, I will not be putting timestamps in the chat. If any other panelist or the Org.com is willing to do that, that might be appreciated. If there aren't any, if there isn't anybody, if you could just chime yourselves, make sure to do that. That'll be great. So yeah, without any further ado, Prime Minister, let's start the debate.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I prefer my POIs to be verbal. So first, to start off with a bit of framing, Abrahamic religions are some of the most dominant religions in society today. They affect a lot of people. Within the context of the motion, the actors of the motion that initiate this religious change are likely going to be the leaders of religious institutions, such as the Pope and the Catholic Church. So what do Abrahamic ideologies currently look like? Since religious change is likely going to happen through an institution, we're most likely going to be looking at changes from the most dominant and orthodox tenets of Abrahamic religions in this debate, such as literal interpretations of the Bible. What does the afterlife currently look like in Abrahamic religions? So those who are chosen by God, these elect few, go to heaven after they die, where they are rewarded for good deeds and from refraining from sin in their lifetime. And those that are not elected and not chosen by God are sent to hell to be punished for eternity. So what puts people in hell and heaven under the status quo? The motion in the Infoslide also imply that under these Abrahamic religions, there are an elect few that are predestined to already live these lives of virtue and go to heaven. And those who are sent to hell are those for eternal punishment, are people that commit sins like pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth, and also those that go against the word of this Bible. When literally interpreted, the Bible condemns those for their people for their identities. For example, being gay is a sin, or a woman having multiple partners and doing actions that go against the word of the Bible would be put into hell. So our first argument is a principled argument. We want to create a world where people are motivated to do good for the sole purpose of doing good. Our opponents will probably come up here and read an argument about how if there is no hell, people will just go crazy and do a lot of bad things. But let me spend the next minute or so telling you why that is not true. What does the status quo look like, and why does it discourage people from committing pure good acts? We would argue that right now religions take an intimidatory tactic in telling people they should do good because they don't want to burn in hell forever. Religion also uses these tactics as a way to cover up fallacies within their religious teachings. So for example, if a child asks a pastor, why is abortion bad? With the opposition side, it is easier for the pastor to just say, because you will burn in hell if you do, and because God says that it is wrong. However, in a world of universalism, the pastor must respond with why then, why does God still accept these populations, and thus spark discussion about whether the religious text is truly equitable or not, because it is in our world, universalism assumes that everyone will be reunited with God in the end, and that God is all loving and everyone is created by God to be loved. Why is this bad? This argument is simple, right? So people who do good things simply out of fear that they might be in worse circumstances if they don't do so are not really acting out of the pure good of their heart. This has three layers. First, in a more philosophical stance, it means that people have corrupted incentives to be good. That means principally it's impossible to know whether those who do good are actually good people or simply just doing good things to avoid being in hell. If there is always an element of selfishness to doing good deeds, the power of doing these deeds are eroded, which is harmful to the morality of society as a whole. And second, in their world, people will blindly follow what society defines as good, or these religious institutions define as good. This looks like white supremacist religious groups that are against abortions and Black Lives Matter being able to use religious indoctrination to garner more support for their movement and disguise their hatred as we're saving these people from burning in hell forever, and they were already not elected from God, so we have the right to do this because we are morally superior. That means people act out of fear, and that drowns out their patience to attempt to understand, or empathy to understand the reasons for why they are actually committing these acts of hate. And third, if there are a select group of people by the religion that can actually be with God, then that creates a very faulty assumption that the majority of believers are actually criminals and sinners that don't belong with God and won't end up with God in the first place. Why is this uniquely bad? First, it harms those who believe because they have the moral high ground. This impact is unique to narcissists and those who probably attend church every Sunday and therefore believe they are the true children of God. This corrupts these people because they believe they are the only true children of God and have moral superiority and can look down on other people with this moral superiority. Ultimately, it corrupts their own good intentions of believing in religion and this internal focus on bettering yourself for society. And second, this harms those who are lesser privileged and indoctrinated by religious beliefs. For example, Timothy 2:12 reads, "But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence." This forces certain populations, in this case women, to believe that they are lesser and actually do not belong with God. In this scenario, we would argue that people are either going to, one, give up on themselves and give up on these identities that are central to their ability to enjoy life and reach self-actualization, and second, adopt a hedonistic worldview where they are more likely to commit violent acts and completely reject religion as. So second, I'll take your POI later. How is this removed in a world of universalism? We would say that in a world of universalism where people understand they will be reunited with God, this allows them to make mistakes and explore lives on their own. This means that they can explore their own virtues and understand what is truly beneficial in this world. A great example of this is Martin Luther, who saw through the lies of the church and relied on his individuality to understand religion should be something that is accessible to all. Our second argument is ending discrimination. In a world where universalism is adopted, we're more likely to see reconciliation and acceptance, especially of identities that are currently discriminated against in the Bible. In the status quo, hatred and prejudice is justified under this concept of saviorism. We're going to save you from burning in hell forever. For example, people actively carry out hate crimes against gay people under the justification of saving them from hell, or they use religion as a way to erase a person's identity. This idea of universalism changes this because it assumes that everyone is accepted by a loving God and will eventually be reunited in heaven. Erasing the idea of only an elect few being predestined to go to heaven further eliminates the root cause of this hatred, which is the sense of moral superiority that people get that makes them feel like they have a God-ordained right to judge others for their sins. I'll take your POI now. Are there any POIs still remaining? Okay.
Why is this not exclusive?
Why is the benefit exclusive to our side? Because we believe that on your side you tell people that they will burn in hell forever, and that once you commit a sin, or if you have sinned, you will never have a chance to reunite with God because you are already condemned to burning in hell forever. Whereas on our side, when we tell people that they will eventually be reunited with God because God is all loving, that allows people to become more accepting of other identities, because there's no longer the ability to say I will go to heaven and you will go to hell, because everyone will eventually be reunited in heaven where there's a level playing field and this sort of discrimination cannot exist. That's why it's exclusive to side with universalism. And second, the idea of universalism also changes this because it assumes that there is a loving God and everyone will be reunited and be on this level playing field. And furthermore, on our side, universalism erases the idea of only an elect few being predestined to go to heaven, which further eliminates the moral superiority, because the idea that only a portion of mankind is predestined to go to heaven makes life a comparative between those who have supposedly sinned and those that are pure. Universalism gets rid of this comparative and assumes that everyone is equally loved by God, which undermines the justification of moral superiority that drives hatred and prejudice of marginalized populations. Another layer to this is that universalism would level the playing field between the rich and the poor, because it's a common tactic for churches to offer indulgences to rich people for them to be able to buy their way out of spending a lifetime in hell. But if this lifetime in hell no longer exists, that means those who are socially economically disadvantaged have an equal opportunity to be reunited with God, which is why I'm so proud to propose today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Leader of Opposition, whenever you're ready.
All right. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Right. Let me get the timer ready. Okay. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. I think the stance of universalism is a very harmful thing, because insofar as we wash down eternal punishment, then the main stakeholder in the debate, i.e. people who mainly believe in these Abrahamic religions, aren't going to get the benefits of deterrence. Right. Coming out from PM, first, I'll tell you the 3 main claims coming out from Prop, and I'll rebut them. And second, first argument, why deterrence is important, because it's literally the entire thing these Abrahamic religions are based around. PM tells you 3 things. First, they tell you discrimination occurs because the concept that people will go to hell forever justifies religious people to persecute those who they perceive as sinful. 3 responses. A, note that religion is often not the direct cause of hate and prejudice. It's just a way to enable the hate. For example, right, if a Christian hates gay person, they don't hate gay people because they don't necessarily hate gay people because the Bible tells them to. The true cause of this is much more irrational, in which humans often have a prejudice against people who are unlike them. This manifests in things like homophobia or racism, right? So this means that people are likely to be homophobic on both sides anyway. B, if religion were truly the reason and the sole reason why people hate gay people, then points of discrimination in religion have already been called out and are being so, and are highly contested in the religion itself, when even the Pope says that it's okay for gay couples to exist. Second, the hate is not that deep that religious people will actively try to hate crime or harm people that they don't like, right? So the harm here is marginal. Plus, these Abrahamic religions have a principle that says that God loves all, so this necessarily overrides that, regardless of whether these people go to hell. C, most of the time gay people don't buy into religion anyway because of the hate that religious people are likely to perpetuate towards them on both sides, i.e. shunning them from their groups because they perceive them as different or sinful. This necessarily means that there's little effect on these people because they aren't going to believe in the concept of hell, so they aren't going to be afraid of any threats that people who believe in Abrahamic religions posit towards them. Either way, religious people are still going to try to pray the gay away because religious people, regardless, will act as if they have the moral high ground and want to bring others into their religion or convince them of their rhetoric. Second, PM tells us that they can spark more discussions about religious texts because her specific example is that if a child asks a pastor about abortion on our side, the pastor will just dismiss it as being sinful and will send you to hell. But on their side, it doesn't. 2 responses. A, I don't understand the logic behind this claim. Why can't the pastor still do the same thing and just say it is sinful? If you do this sin, then you have to stay in this state of suffering for a longer time compared to the rest of the humans of the world. Therefore, it is bad. The pastor can still use the same example to wave it away. No idea why this is true. B, even if this is true, this necessarily doesn't matter because most of the time, religious people in this world will just use their religious texts to justify whatever views that they have. So that whenever they are questioned about their views, they'll just point in the text and say that God says that this is wrong. Regardless of the punishment, this is wrong. Third thing that Prop says, people who are religious may not have good intentions when they do go on op. They tell us that extremists and white supremacists are going to have more credence and have more people buy into their message of fear. But this is not true, right? Because the more extreme and ridiculous the message of their eternal damnation is, the harder it is for them to spread it. Notice that the majority of people are not necessarily afraid of going to hell if they are not religious, and you can't assume that everyone believes in Abrahamic religions. So when white supremacists on our side try to use this narrative of you will go to hell forever, it sounds completely ridiculous and unbelievable to these people, right? The comparative is then, if your narrative is, oh, you'll be punished for a while, but afterwards it'll be fine, I think there's barely any delta that Prop can claim here, right? Why is this necessarily problematic? Prop says that they give moral superiority to narcissists. I think that on both sides, this moral superiority is still going to exist anyway. It's just that religious narcissists are then going to say, oh, we won't suffer that much as you. Instead of, you will go to hell forever, but we will go to heaven. It's about the same thing actually, right? The only metric that ops need to prove in this debate is that the counterfactual is a lot worse on Prop when the fear factor of eternal damnation doesn't exist towards people who buy into religion. We can win on this because other methods of deterrence are likely symmetric like CJS, and B, tend to be ineffective. People do commit crimes in status quo despite the threat of going to jail. And C, religious deterrence will frame punishment as eternal on our side, right? It does not care about the concept of life and death. If you get punished, it is forever. There's no such thing as dying. So people are more likely to be afraid of hell than a life sentence or a death sentence by the criminal justice system. Why then is deterrence important? A, humans are not perfect. Regardless of whether you are religious or not, we are going to make mistakes because
because we're not perfectly rational at all times. Even if we are, we still make morally abhorrent decisions because we tend to be selfish, short-sighted, and greedy, right? This necessarily means that we need a counteractive narrative to get humans to reflect on their actions before they do it, so they are more able to put aside the greed and are less likely to be rash if they think about the fact that they might go to hell. Deterrence in Abrahamic religions then looks like being afraid of burning in hell forever and being separated from eternal happiness in heaven. I'll take one now.
If people are doing good things simply because they like don't want to burn in hell forever, are those really good things, or do they have corrupt motivations?
The motivations doesn't matter, because insofar as they don't cause anyone harm, society is better off anyways. B, deterrence is weaker on prop. The alternative stance that we use is obviously eternal damnation, right? But there are two things to note here. First, on either side, depictions of hell are going to be on either side, depictions of hell as burning in immeasurable agony is not something that humans can conceptualize. What humans can conceptualize, though, is being separated from the higher being or the benevolent God that they believe in, as well as their loved ones who are likely to be in heaven, right? This means that humans have the active deterrence from making morally abhorrent decisions on our side, because people don't want to be separated from those that they care about forever. I.e., the comparative is that if I'm going to go to heaven anyway, why does it matter? Second thing, it's impossible to prove that deterrence is stronger on prop because people cannot conceptualize permanent suffering. For example, people get piercings and tattoos in status quo because even though it is extremely painful, they will know afterwards it will be fine. However, people can conceptualize on our side being banned from an oasis from the rest of eternity and burning in hell forever. They are far more afraid of this because of these reasons opposed.
Thank you very much. Next, DPM, whenever you're ready.
Oh, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think on prop, we're willing to trade off deterrence for things like prospective will or motivation, right? I think there's 5 key reasons on why this is better than the deterrence effect that's going to be that opposition side want to be talking about. Notice this completely outframes and just like completely disregards the entire argument that opposition side brings to you. I hope their DLO can bring a much better argument, right? Firstly, right, I think the problem with deterrence is that they're currently within the status quo, immutable characteristics within people that you just cannot deter them from actively like participating in, right? For things like you are born with, something like homosexuality or different types of sexuality or like your race, your gender, etc. These are things that are immutable and you cannot deter people from doing it. As such, the eternal punishment system and then like the preaching that God is not like all loving is incredibly harmful in this regard because they cannot change. That's something that firstly they need to address. We already brought this up in PM. I don't think they gave us a good response for it. But secondly, right, I think fear is a limiting factor insofar as, sure, a small amount of fear can motivate you to do things. But once it becomes too much for a human psyche to handle, the psychology of that necessarily becomes you give up, you are despaired. You either go do something really bad, therefore, or you're just constantly in a state of being in a really bad state and like you're unable to like meaningfully get any type of change, etc. Right? But notice this, right? When opposition side comes out here and tell you, and like status quo, God already loves everyone. When they tell you like in the status quo, God already loves anyone, or people already believe, or like these softer stances that they take. Notice that this is directly harming for their impact. I think the correct stance for ops burden is to prove, and if they want maximum impact, they have to show us that God and something is very revered and all of their ethical codes is very, very strict, right? I don't think they're able to get away with saying God loves everyone and everyone believes of that on opposition side of the health. I think that is they need to make a concession within this debate, right? But fourthly, right, I think the motivation of people is probably much better because it is fundamentally like from your inside out, right? So notice like within the society, we have already big systems of deterrence that already exist. The things that they mention of legal and social system likely means that whether or not deterrence exists, people are not going to rob and go kill somebody on the street because they're going to physically become incarcerated and like physically get sent to trial, etc. Their community is also going to denounce them, etc. Why is this important? Because Ops' argument of deterrence might be able to fly like 5,000 years ago, where there is no systems of governments in check. But notice the types of good action that we want in the current day society is not those things of big deterrence that scares you away from people, right? That in the status quo, people can get away with not going to eternal hell so long as they don't do all the bad things. But the small things in which people cannot retrospectively analyze, right? My daily actions that I do to other people might not be able to bad enough to send me to hell, but Op doesn't give them incentive to do the small actions that are good, right? Under our side of the house, the perception of God is an all-loving one. And with that perception, you follow the perception of God and you follow your actions of God and you try to cater to as much people as possible. Before I move on, sure, I'll take a point.
Why does too much fear cause people to give up if status quo is one where religion preaches eternal damnation and you don't see catalysts jumping off a bridge?
Yeah, because there are white Catholics who have like privileged situations, right? There's a lot of instances that I gave you. I gave you 5 reasons on why that's bad, right? I think I can move on to the second one, right? Before I move on, right? There's another claim I just want to address, right? Like how pastors can do the same things within their side of the house. I don't necessarily think it's true that under their side of the house, like pastors would just like call something sinful and like for duration of time, it doesn't matter most of the times because religious people still uses like religious texts to justify the majority of situations that happen, right? I'm going to move on to the constructive of today about the perception of God. Notice what our LO speaker, what the PM and LO clash has mainly been about. That is to say that clash has been mainly about the punishment and the individual that is fearful of their punishment or like how they act according to the punishment, right? I'm going to give you the argument that spans beyond that, right? That notice on the opposition side of the house, you're unable to form an image of God that is truly all-loving. Why is that the case? This is because of the inherent contradictions that lies within this idea of eternal punishment. That God abandons somebody, that clearly states in the Infoslide, only Universalism under our side of the house actually preaches God as an image and a deity that loves everyone. This is particularly harmful because under their side of the house, God simply doesn't love anyone. And to the extent at which you follow God's will, that's extremely harmful, right? So for example, the reasons why opposition speaker gives out and tells you hate crimes and all of these things exist is because their image of God just simply isn't a one that accepts everyone, right? So there's no basic human grounds to go in with, right? So if I am a very orthodox Christian that does exist within the status quo, I'm unable to view a person that is outside of my systems of belief as even a human being, even if they're a human being. But notice the comparison, right? The comparative preaches that God actively loves everyone. And sure, we're willing to concede the trade-off is that it is going to be slightly contradictory to a lot of the orthodox Christian text that is offered that actively like encourages hate towards other group of people, right? But I think this is a worthy trade-off. Why is this the case, right? I think there's 3 reasons why. Firstly, we are much more accepting to everyone, and there's a fundamental empathy that exists, right? Because insofar as God that you love and you believe and everything in your life depends on is able to extend the love and care to everyone, even though they get a small amount of proportional punishment at the end of the day, I think we are capable, therefore, of like more sympathy, right? That is to say, even if there's differences existing, we're much more capable of like just caring about other people. I think on net, that means under our side of the world, we have less discrimination, etc., of all the impacts that Elo mentioned, right? But secondly, right, I think we have much more discussion in the sense that what the example that I'll bring up, right? That when you ask a pastor a question about why we should be hating a person or like why God doesn't like this person, etc., there's going to be a meaningful discussion that exists that enhances the religion, right? I think the only way we get better religion, and their side has no way of like noticing like we're changing this bad form of religion, right? This type of discussion in religion is noticing the inherent contradictions that exist between God loving everyone and the other bad messages of God. I think this probably means that under our side of the house, religion is able to evolve into a better form and that the discussion is able to enhance religion and everyone's going to get better, etc. I think for all of these reasons, but also like etc., right? Like thirdly, right? I think institutions exist that coerce people within the status quo to do really heinous things under the name of religion. And that is to say, all of the hate crimes, etc., right? I think that is significantly decreased in the world of prop because insofar as God's central message is loving everyone, it is far more difficult, A, for the institutions to use these rhetorics to begin with, and B, I don't think it is possible for these people to just blindly accept insofar as the God they believe is the perception of one that is actually truly all-loving. Because our side is the only side that provides a truly loving God and a God that is also accepting, and the opposition side has no way to evolve their religion. I think we're incredibly proud to propose.
Thank you very much. DLO, whenever you're ready.
Hi, yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Proposition makes the assumption that everybody who subscribes into religion is one that is of pure mind, of like a good heart, and is willing to be a good person overall. There are a few reasons wrong with that, but before that, let's just answer a few questions, right? They tell us largely 3 things. Number 1, they try to give us 4 reasons why deterrence doesn't matter. I'll prove to you why all those are false or irrelevant later. Number 2, they talk about how an image of God that is all loving is something that is exclusive to like proposition and why that's so good. And lastly, on how they can have meaningful discussions on why you hate somebody. So for the first thing, when they try to tell you deterrence doesn't matter, they tell you 4 things. Number 1, they say identity is something that cannot be deterred. Secondly, they say fear is going to make someone give up on religion as a whole. See, they tell you about better motivation. And lastly, they tell you how people don't have an incentive to do good beyond just doing not bad. A few responses. Firstly, when they try to tell you that identity is something that cannot be deterred, we have conceded to this, first of all. Second of all, Edmund's already given you 3 reasons why identity is not going to be something that is going to be largely contested in religion anymore, because it is something that has been called out upon many times again and again. For example, when Christians try to claim that being gay is bad, you have multiple people citing older Bibles that were like edited to make it homophobic in the beginning. This means that the people who are in religions, or at the very least society as a whole, is progressive enough to call out this kind of behavior, and people are more likely to be accepting of gay people in the first place. So whatever harms they try to bring is very marginal and not important enough in this debate. Secondly, they talk about how fear is going to make someone give up on religion. We tell you then we are living in status quo, insofar as their characterization that Abrahamic religions are the ones that are the dominant narrative in the society today. We tell you then this is completely false, right? Because people already have this kind of idea of hell in status quo because of how this is, and because they have this kind of idea, we don't see why they will want to leave the religion in the first place if we're going to follow the characterizations of like proposition themselves. Secondly, and thirdly, they talk about better motivation and how it's good to have good intent behind your actions. We tell you then very quickly here, and to like compare with the 4th line of analysis too, on how people don't have an incentive to do good. We say it is enough that we have the impact. Intent will never override impact, because impact is what affects other people within or outside of within the religion or outside of the religion. It does not matter what their motivation is. We want them to do good in this world, or at the very least not make somebody's life harder. So they don't have to do more good just beyond not doing bad. They just have to not harm people. We tell you then we're able to prove this. Opposition has already taken this debate, right? Secondly, they talk about how we're unable to follow an image of God that is all loving. We tell you firstly, this is under the assumption that everybody is going to follow in God's footsteps, and how the assumption that everyone who subscribes into religion is a loving person. This is like false for 2 reasons. First, they already characterize to you that people who follow religions like out of fear are people in religion first. Secondly, these people already have corrupt motivations and are just trying to escape hell. If we follow this kind of analysis, we tell you then there is no way they're able to guarantee that everybody who is subscribing to religion would want to follow in God's footsteps and not be all loving. Secondly, then we tell you there is no incentive for them to be good, because purgatory, or like just burning burning for a while and then being able to enter the oasis that is heaven later, is something that is not as a permanent enough punishment or a strong enough deterrence. Secondly, then on how people are more capable of loving people, like other people on the comparative, because they follow in God's footsteps of an all-loving God image, we tell you then this is not true, right? For the very reasons I told you just now, but also because this is not something that's exclusive. People are already capable of loving other people, because it is in the literal Bible that like God loves everybody, no matter what kind of contention they want to bring up, right? As long as people run this kind of narrative and people know that God loves everybody, it doesn't matter if it's true or false, like according to whatever characterization they bring, the impacts are still the same. People are still going to love people. This is not an exclusive point. Lastly, then, on meaningful discussions on why you hate somebody, Edmund already told you here that punishment still exists. The punishment exists in a form of purgatory, where you have to either reflect or burn for a period of time before you can go to heaven. So I don't see why why we can spark meaningful discussions if it's still a sin in the eyes of the church. Then argumentation, like my own argumentation, right? They asked us to bring a better argument. I don't think this is better. I think it's just as well. But here's one anyway, on how the concepts of suffering are the basis for the criminal justice system to take formation in the first place. 4 layers of analysis. Notice first that this is a retrospective debate where proposition had to defend a counterfactual where Abrahamic religions were always universalist. This means then if they had to defend one where the punishment wasn't a thing, or punishment or permanent punishment wasn't a thing, it means that the criminal justice system wouldn't exist. Because one, in the past, religion was the basis of society. It was literally the backbone of society, like the British Empire, or how Christianity literally inspired the Constitution, etc. Therefore, the root principle of paying for your wrongs is one that inspired this criminal justice system today in the first place. This means then, the third layer of analysis, with the lack of conceptualizing punishment, we don't get reparations in twofold. Number one, reparations in the form of justice from the criminal justice system itself. Two reasons, right? Because one, the criminal justice system implements punishments like imprisonment, life, sentencing, or death penalty, all of which are similar to how, like all of which are like punishment based and not about reflecting on your wrongs and then moving on. Two, this is not just to protect people from like the population of criminals, but it's also as a form of reparations to those who were wrong. And lastly, this is also why crimes are publicized and not kept secret, because they want to deter and give solace. Secondly, then, reparations in the form of solace that is exclusive only to opposition. Three things. Number one, victims often suffer physical injuries and mental trauma after a crime, or they could literally just lose their life. Therefore, people, victims, or at least families of victims, they deserve to have, like, they have justified hatred towards the perpetrator. They deserve then a form of reparation. But even if, right, we're unable to give them this kind of reparation, for example, a rape victim, you can't easily convict a rapist, right? At the very least, these victims have the form of solace, knowing that when the criminal dies, they will go to hell and get what they deserve. At the very least, even if we're not able to give them the proper justice, which was already founded on religion in the first place, we're able to give them this form of solace, right? Which is better for the victim's mental state. The comparative is where how they know people are going to go to heaven no matter what they have done in life, and these victims never get any form of reparations on proposition. So lastly, the comparative is status quo. The comparative is status quo on opposition, where offenders like Ted Bundy get to pay for their crimes, where he gets to pay for the murder of 30-ish women and counting, and where even the victims of those who get away with crimes are offered some form of solace in the fact that they can go to sleep at night knowing that their offenders will go to hell and burn. So we tell you then on two reasons, we've already given you two reasons, the comparative is pretty simple. Because we prioritize the impact on society over whatever intention you may have as a principally correct proposition, and because we're able to give victims two forms of justice, either on literal justice or at least in the form of solace, we have clearly taken this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Government Whip, whenever you're ready.
All right, just to check, am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Cool. Time starts now. Intention is everything because intention ties to impact. In this speech, let's do three key things. First, let's clear up some misconceptions that still has yet to be settled in today's debate. And then second, ask yourself the two key questions that addresses today's clash. First, who best stops crime? And second, who best uplifts the moral of the general public? And last, if we have time, take both sides' arguments to the very highest ground and why you're always going to prefer proposition. At the top, there's two pieces of like fluff that both sides has yet to address. The first is, can religion spring hate? And second is, does intention matter? Let's first move on, can religion spring hate, right? We would argue, if you look around the world in different examples, right? A lot of people center their entire identity around religion. This could look like devoting tons of their time praying before dinners, praying before bed, or going to church every Sunday, which means that the doctrination they have to listen and watch on a daily basis can influence their actors and their ethical codes. What does this look like? You're always going to prefer us over our opponent's assertion for simply saying that, like, oh, you know what, like religion doesn't spring hate. Like a bad person is just going to probably use religion as a legitimization of their actions. We would argue, no, like there's still some people that like purely their acts of hate is purely sparked because of religious acts, for the examples that we have mentioned above. If religion matters to their afterlife, like our opponents claim, right, then that is exactly a reason as to why it's an integral part of their life and can be an integral part in the decision-making and the way that they act, right? We directly also read you like biblical clauses, for example, Timothy 2:21, that cites the exact hate that has been occurring under the name of religion. Why is this clash important, right? We win this, where do we win the debate? Because now people commit harmful acts or look down on other people purely for the majority cause of religion. Our opponent's only response is like, you know what, in LO, we said that the Pope said being gay is okay. This is like a problematic view of today's debate. First, it's a cherry-picked example. Just because the Pope like addressed the one important oppression inside our existing society doesn't suddenly mean like all these other forms of oppression is suddenly gone, right? But keep in mind, there's still like other oppressions that exist, for example, in like ethnical supremacy, racism, or even through like neocolonialism, right? These are many other things that still exist. Like just because the Pope said that like homosexuality is something that people should accept doesn't mean like all these integral biases are gone. But the second biggest fluff that people has yet addressed is this idea of, does intention matter? Let's take some time to address this, right? Motivation is the most important thing to today's round because the panel in itself has a moral obligation to make sure that people are motivated to do good instead of motivated to be selfish and make sure they don't burn in hell forever. Just because impact doesn't really, like just because the impact in itself is good doesn't really matter because the means can also influence the impact, which leads to my second argument, right? Even if you buy the entire argument, motivation is a direct causation to the impact our opponents care so much about for two reasons that we have read you since prop speech PM. First, people are likely to follow mindless claims in a world where like they're just like with the wrong motivations because they're basically just following orders of religious texts. What does this look like? This looks like Timothy 2:12. If the Bible just says something like, oh, you know what, women should be inferior and women should be silent inside households, then people would think, oh, you know what, that's the right thing to do. And guess what? I'm not going to care about like whether this is actually the right thing to do, because I just doing this purely for the sake of the fact that I don't want to end up in hell. But the second reason is because people aren't doing good things that they believe in, which means that they're unlikely to commit other acts of good that are not mentioned in the Bible. What does this world look like? The opposition is advocating for a world where people are simply doing good just for the sake of doing good, which means that if there are oppressions that are not addressed within the Bible, like they probably wouldn't really care about it, right? So at the end of the day, good acts out of the goodness of your heart is always going to be better than the good acts out of the selfish reasons of not wanting to burn into hell. Now, on that note, let's move on to the two pieces of clash. No, thank you. Address that later. Two key clashes in today's round. The first one is who best stops crime. Our opponent's entire argument and the entire chances of winning today's debate hinges on this idea of deterrence, right? But there are two key problems with this argument they have yet addressed for Mason's speech. First, keep in mind, if deterrence, like they talk about, like the fact that they can burn in hell is going to be a disincentive for them to not commit acts of crime, then we would argue that this deterrence still exists on our side, right? Keep in mind that universalism still means that you still have to spend a lot of time in purgatory, and that in itself we would argue is going to be like an inherent thing that would stop people from committing crime in the first place, right? That in itself is already eliminating our opponent's entire case. But second, we would argue that our current rule still exists in like codified law and government legislation to stop people from doing bad. What does this look like? And like, this is something they have yet to respond to. This would look like maybe like jail, the current criminal justice system that would like stop people from like committing crime because of the fact that like they can be like put into jail for like their entire lifetime. Our opponent's only response to this is like this is similar to religion. Our opponents is really misunderstanding the direction of our response. We're just saying that right now, deterrence is also going to exist on our side, regardless of religion or not, because of the fact that there's an existing criminal justice system. But the second and the most important clash in today's round is on who best uplifts the moral of the general public. Our argument, unlike what the op tries to misconstrue it to be, is not about discussion. We give you two key reasons at the end of the day that could make you vote for proposition really comfortably. First, we make people do good for the sole purpose of being good. First, we argue that there is already a moral obligation to the panelists today to make sure that people do good purely out of the goodness of their hearts, because then people aren't just like doing good because they want to be selfish. But second, even if you want to engage this argument in the practical, it's also going to be engaging with the practical purely for the reasons because people are less likely to follow mindless claims. But second, people are going to be doing even more good things because they actually believe in like being a good person overall, right? But the second thing is that people are all seen as equal. This is the point where opponents really drop the ball. The best argument being brought by Sonia is that under a world where universalism exists, everybody can be viewed as equals and can be viewed as the child of God. Before I move on to Wang, I'll take a point.
The criminal justice system simply does not exist without religion, which I have proven in my speech. It's a retrospective debate. So then what are your other deterrences for people to not do bad?
Okay, well, I would argue then this becomes like a contradiction in your case, right? Because Elo comes up and tells me that like religion doesn't really spring hate, but then suddenly tell me that religion is a sole cause of criminal justice system. So what is like religion, right? Is it an integral part of our society or is it not? But at the end of the day, we would argue even because like Abrahamic religion suddenly adopts universalism doesn't mean that like polices and like jails outside of my window is suddenly going to disappear, right? These deterrences are still going to exist. There's no reason as to why like they're just going to suddenly vanish because like Abrahamic religions becomes universal. But at the end of the day, why is people's moral good the most important thing in today's round? We would argue it's a prerequisite for everything being mentioned, because only when equality is actually achieved, we see things like the criminal justice system, deterrence, crimes, all these things being viewed as an equal eye. And at the end of the day, there aren't any sorts of oppression or discrimination that's going to exist in order to marginalize different populations or be used as an excuse to like marginalize and disenfranchise populations simply because of their identity. And that's the most important thing in today's round that the op cannot suddenly come up and misconstrue later. So proud to propose.
Thank you very much. Op Whip, whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm just checking my audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you so much. Pronouns are he, him, and take my PRs verbally. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. My speech today will be very simple. I'll start off with several clarifications. I'll move on to rebuttals and then clashes, and then I'll explain to you why we want this debate today. So firstly, clarifications, right? On intention and impact, right? We tell you why intention does not matter and why it does not tie to impact. Because firstly, the religious scripts dictate that your impact has to be good and cause no harm. And secondly, intention cannot come to fruition. And if people are too scared to stray away from these scripts. So with that being said, I think proposition has to buy into that, and so the point falls. Now, let's start with rebuttals, right? Firstly, first speaker came up here and talked about how meaningful discussions on religion that PM and DPA asserts. The comparative they push on us is symmetric. Even though they all called it out, no idea why religious people whose holy take tells them to stay away from the sinful, wants decay, and have discourse about why something is wrong, apart from the dismissive reasoning that it is sinful and punishing. Secondly, second speaker, talk about deterrence or an identity, right? Not possible to begin with. PM tells you these people are antagonized by Abrahamic religions, but are not going to buy into the religion. It does not stand in this debate anyways. Secondly, too much fear causes people to give up, right? Some religious people don't give up because they are privileged. Not true. Comparatively, the promise of reward of eternal life is much stronger if the alternative is worse than proud. i.e. eating an ice cream after a sweltering afternoon is more refreshing than eating an ice cream on a cool morning. Moving on, third speaker, the big issue of can religion bring hate, right? Yes, religion enables hate. Already considered this. Notice that A, it is symmetric. Prop never mechanized a proper comparative. The extent of it was simply saying that, oh, somehow they get more discourse and somehow people will respect others better, simply because they don't suffer eternally anymore. Secondly, Bob speakers already rebutted this. Notice that religious people still have disdain for you because you are a sinner. The second rebuttal, goodness of your heart or motive literally does not matter, because insofar as people do good in the fear of going to hell, they're going to do good. Okay, people don't discriminate because they fear hell. The Bible never said if you let gay people continue to exist, you'll be damned. We then flip the narrative on Prop, right? Because this hard stance, that means even if the Bible did not say so, persecuting gay people with that hard stance won't work because they are driven from religion. Driven away from religion, they don't subscribe to the idea of hell anyways and has little impacts on their lives. Lastly, on how criminal justice system will still exist. Okay, why? Daphne gave you an analysis on why it would not, when she said the principle of punishment from hell is why the criminal justice system existed in the first place. You didn't prove why it would exist besides saying it wouldn't disappear. There's a lack of sufficient analysis that cannot be simply filled in via POI or reply. So, moving on, clashes, right? I want to talk about stance, but let's talk about which type of good acts is better, since Garth, we've talked about it, right? Okay, on Garth, they say good acts on their side is good because people are good and people do it because they're kind people, right? They do it out of their own free will, right? Sure, but how likely is this going to happen, right? Their entire case is contingent on this premise, but no structured analysis was provided as to how likely this is to happen. And insofar as I can prove to you that this cannot happen today, they lose this debate. Whereas on opposition side, simply they talk about how people on our side simply do good because they don't want to be in trouble, they don't want to go to hell, right? But anyways, we still tell you that even so, good acts happen is better than no good acts at all, which is what is going to happen on Proud side. Now, notice then good acts is better than no good acts at all, right? The comparative is that on the scale. Insofar as I prove to you why this is only achievable on the op, we win this debate today. Secondly, several points. I'll integrate them together. So, on the points that Garfield brought to us, right? Which side best solve crimes, which side best care about morals, and lastly on equality, right? I'll explain this to you. So, what does the world look like on both sides, and which side is better, right? Okay, let's talk about Prop side first. What the best case on their side looks like. Firstly, they tell you about discrimination, but even though this discrimination is not mitigated on their side, even though we tell you discrimination isn't caused by religion in the first place, but instead of much irrational cause, like Edmund mentioned to you, we tell you discrimination is not tied to a religion even, and even if we tell you, you level the playing field, then op has the burden on themselves to prove to us why they want to defend people like Ted Bundy, right? Then Prop has to respond to Edmund's analysis as to why discrimination is now unlikely there. Moving on. Secondly, they tell you people who are religious may not have good intentions. We don't see how this is true because now their extremist ideas are harder to spread on their side of the house. moving on. Thirdly, for the last one on their side of the house, most superiority to narcissists on opposition bench, right? This is what they say, and I find this extremely interesting, right? It's not even exclusive on our side to even begin with, because there's not much explanation as to why this is exclusive, other than telling us that people look down on others simply because they are better and they think that they are better. And even so, Edmund explained this to you already, so I'm not going to touch a lot about that. But moving on, opposition bench, we tell you already in first speaker speech, in Edmund's speech, that people are bad, where crime still happen despite criminal justice system on a daily basis. So then when we directly contest it in our case, we tell you firstly why we need deterrence in the first place. In short, deterrence does two main things. That's the main thing of, because now people because people in status quo make stupid mistakes that are sometimes selfish, short-sighted, greedy, and for which they should be punished for. This means something has to be in place for us to level this out, right? Hence, deterrence is the best choice. Why then is the deterrence better on opposition bench? DPM's uncharitable assertion that the amount of deterrence of criminal justice system and religion is the same is false. Because if we want to assume anything, we have to assume that the idea of burning in purgatory or hell is that's more deterrence than the idea that God will forgive me, so I should be a nice person so that I don't disappoint God. Secondly, and even so, right, the deterrence is on this concept that people are likely to want to build in their heads, right? It is that people would less likely want to buy the idea of something that is not permanent. But now instead, right, they're likely to want to buy into the idea that burning in hell forever and losing their loved ones forever and never going into the good place of heaven. Also, moving on, how it relates to the criminal justice system through Daphne, right? You guys didn't want to buy this, but let me explain this a little bit more. We tell you how the criminal justice system is only here today because of the punishment that exists in religion in the first place. Insofar as Prop cannot concede to this, they lose this debate. But even so, if they concede to this, they also lose this debate. On the other side of the house, the lack of conceptualizing punishment, you have to realize on the other side of the house, when you don't conceptualize punishment, right, you don't get reparations. So you don't get too many things that he has been pushing to you in her speech. Justice and for last. So firstly, on justice, the same reason why we try to protect victims from the criminals who harm them is the same reason why justice exists in the first place, why the criminal justice system exists in the first place. And this is crucial, and proposition has to buy into this argument. Secondly, on solace, though justice is good enough already, we still need solace for victims who will never given the justice that they deserve, right? This is better for the victims' mental health and mental state in the first as a whole, right? Because now, even if, let's say, in a sexual assault case, right, if the assaulter is not tried on, the victim has the idea that I believe now God will punish them. And even if that does not do as much as we would like it to do, we tell you that it does more than what Prop can provide us in today's debate. So we win this clash anyways. So as to weigh this in simple terms, right, Prop simply cannot claim the benefit that the net benefit that they cannot claim is that justice, things like justice and solace, right? Take for example Ted Bundy. If Prop wants to come up here and defend Ted Bundy, then sure, they can win this debate today. But I don't think any of them want to do that. Secondly, the idea on op is simple, right? Take for example, if I were to break rules in a debate, if someone were to file equity on me on a hard complaint, I'll be kicked out of the tournament. And that's not something I want to achieve, right? And if someone were to file a soft complaint, which what exists on their side, I'll just be like, oh, okay, sure, chances of me not wanting to be kicked out of the tournament is higher, and this is why deterrence is a lot more important than what op can do, and what Prop can do. And op can do this a lot better than anything Prop can provide you. So insofar as proposition is okay with people being brought upon and they don't protect them for the reasons that they're okay and don't want people to push one another for stupid reasons narcissists do it, we win this debate today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Off reply whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm assuming I'm audible. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Let's get this done quick, right? This debate boils down to mainly one issue, which is deterrence for what is good and what is bad. Basically, for this clash, why it's so important is because we need to create a better society that actually doesn't do bad, right? A society that is safe for everybody. So what does proposition tell you then? We give you two arguments. Number one, people need deterrence and we need the fear of punishment to block them off from doing bad things for two reasons that Edmund's told you. One, humans are far from perfect. Two, purgatory is not as scary. There is no contention from opposition here. Besides, it doesn't matter, and the criminal justice system exists anyway. We tell you then this isn't enough for them to ground their argument or to ground their stance in this debate because we don't see why it doesn't matter, and they never prove to you why. Secondly, then, on punishments and how these punishments in Abrahamic religions were the prerequisite to the modern criminal justice system, right? Notice then, it takes down their first contention on how the criminal justice system is already an active deterrent in modern society. We tell you here, note that it is a retrospective debate. You'd have to paint the world of what it would look like without these Abrahamic religions having the concept of eternal damnation in their doctrines in the first place. We clearly told you what it's going to look like very, very clearly, because how religions were the backbone of ancient society. If eternal damnation wasn't a thing, the criminal justice system, which translated from people are going to be punished from their sins forever, would never translate to people must pay for their crimes, because that kind of narrative of people must be punished for their sins would never exist in the first place. This is important then because justice and solace is important for the victims of like these crimes. We told you exclusively why this is exclusive on proposition. But then what does opposition tell you here? The opposition has one main claim, right? First, that two main claims. First, that the principle of a corrupt, like the principle behind doing things just because of a deterrence is corrupt and harmful. The second, that it ties to like the impact of the impact of what people are trying to do in society today. So when they talk about the intent from the deterrence and how it's harmful, they tell you only one reason. So we're going to go straight to it. They say intent ties to impact and the means to it is going to be harmful. But Jordon already told you why this impact nor the means would be harmful, right? Because as long as you harm somebody, it is like straight against the doctrine that is being taught to these people who subscribe to this religion in the first place. Therefore, we don't see why even having horrible intentions leads to like bad impact. It's very simple to break the deadlock here, the intent versus the impact, right? Because the intent is the last thing standing from opposition when it comes to deterrence. Why do we win then? Because it does not matter how many people are having good intentions doing good things, because on the quantitative scale, more people who are scared of like going to hell for the rest of their lives after death, right? I know that doesn't make sense, but like for eternity, right? Those people are more scared. They're more likely to do good things, even though they have corrupt intentions behind them. So it's clear then we create the better society because on a quantitative scale, we have more people doing good things. Sure, they may not have the perfect principle. They may not be the perfect, they may not be like the perfect religious person with pure intentions and a heart of gold, but at the very least, we have a society where more people are doing good things, less people are doing bad things. So at the end of the day, two things from proposition will still stand. Number one, we create a better society when people are too scared to do things that are wrong. Secondly, then we tell you the punishment, like we are able to create a modern criminal justice system. It was the prerequisite. It's the only reason why justice and solace exist for these victims today. Because of this, and because this clearly outweighs whatever corrupt intentions that opposition tries to push on us, we have clearly taken this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lastly, government reply whenever you're ready.
Hi, just let me get my timer. I'll start my speech now. Let's make it clear at the top, this motion is going to affect those that are currently already subscribed to these religions and trust religious authorities. That's why you're likely to see the changes we tell you in terms of morality and reduced discrimination be able to manifest. So first, in this first clash of which side incentivizes these religious people to become better people. On our side, we tell you that we promote the principle of encouraging good for the sake of doing good and not for selfish reasons, because you're no longer doing it because you fear eternal damnation in hell. Their only response to this is that intent doesn't matter as long as the actions are good, but that doesn't interact with the principal element of the argument, which is that we want to preserve the moral compass of society and encourage people to follow their own morality and conscience instead of asking them to do what is good by following what is strictly laid out in religious texts. This reduces the flexibility for people to doubt religious tenets that are problematic for fear of being in hell forever. But let's take them at their highest ground and debate this clash on a practical level and look at this like other clash of deterrence. So on deterrence, note that there's a key contradiction here in their arguments. If you buy their argument that DLO reads you that people will continue to discriminate against people because they can say they'll still receive this impermanent punishment when they die, that means the deterrence of temporary punishment still exists. Realize that universalism just means that you can join God at the end, not that there is no punishment and no deterrence. And even if we take them at their highest ground and assume deterrence is somewhat weakened, deterrence in terms of religion, deterrence against criminal activity already exists in codified law and government legislation. They don't prove why religious deterrence is essential to maintaining rule of law. They say a few things. Without a concept of punishment and retribution in religion, the criminal justice system won't work, and that victims will want to know that their perpetrators will eventually be punished. But it doesn't make sense why religious change would have such a heavy influence on the criminal justice system, which is usually executed by a secular government. Also, remember that the idea of punishment still exists under universalism, and perpetrators will still be punished religiously in our world. Now on to the reason why you vote for Prop, which is our second clash, which side can reduce discrimination and otherization within religion. Realize that identity is not something that can ever be deterred, which means that religion without this construct of these people with marginalized identities being at the bottom of the hierarchy should be preferred, which is what universalism gives you. Without universalism, religion creates a stratified structure with marginalized populations at the bottom, and it creates hatred of these marginalized populations and allows the justification of this hatred, such as discrimination against LGBTQ people. Why is this true? Because there's an idea that God has a select few, and that if you sin, you won't be able to join him in heaven and you'll burn in hell for eternity, and that you are inherently not as morally inferior to people that can adhere to religious codes and religious text. Let's look at the responses they read to this argument. First, they say religion isn't the direct cause of hate and prejudice. It's just a way to enable the hate. That's not, and that the true cause is irrational. People just don't like people that are different from them. That's not true. People don't understand people that are unlike them, but that doesn't inherently create hate. Hate is created by socialization and someone with authority telling you that this difference is bad. Within religious populations, this authority tends to be religious institutions. Every human is different. Religion singles out these specific differences to enable this hate. And even we can uniquely solve for this by having religious leaders push the narrative that God is accepting of all. So even if homophobia does have other causes, our side alleviates this because it promotes the narrative that everyone will be reunited in heaven and thus should be treated equally. They say that the harms are marginal. And second, they say that religious leaders are still going to use temporary punishment in religious texts to justify hatred. But realize that, remember from the top of the debate, that religious leaders are going to be the ones that initiate this change, and religious people trust religious authority. So we're going to see the root of this problem disappear. And finally, realize that they give virtually no responses to this idea of indulgences that create inequality. We give you from the beginning of the debate about how rich people get ahead of poor people by using financial capital to purchase tickets out of hell. This is a concrete example of why the idea of eternal hell and heaven for only a select few directly creates discrimination and inequality. So take both sides of the highest ground. Their biggest offense comes from deterrence, but it's unclear how much change actually happens to deterrence because the criminal justice system still exists. You would still see punishment functioning under universalism. On our impact of equality, you see this immediate change and reduction in discrimination, which is why I am so proud to propose in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with this, we end the round. Thank you so much to all the debaters for a great debate. Everyone cross floors and shake hands. And because you'll be receiving the results in what's it called? The closing ceremony. You won't be receiving results now, so you can leave this room whenever you're ready. Thank you so much.
Thank you, opponents. Thank you for all the
Thank you for the debate. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.